weavers of the quiet light. The first time Mira Voss heard the mirror hum, she mistook it for the wind that used to move across the balconies of her childhood home. In the bad years, when balconies were boarded and windows draped in cloth, she learned to measure fear by silence. The day the mirrors began to sing again, it wasn't silence that terrified her. It was the way the sound fit the shape of her name, as if the world had been practicing her. She was 34, a memory cartographer by trade and a soldier by necessity, living in the salt-scabbed skeleton of an old coastal city that once glittered with glass. The lantern, one of the matte, heart-shaped devices that remembered without reflecting, rested in a padded sling against her ribs. It vibrated sometimes when strangers smiled. It pulsed when a child cried. She had stopped trying to explain it. It knew the weight of people. Mira had taken the job at the edge of habit and grief. A lantern team had cleared this district 2 years ago, when the sea remembered how to move again, and families had returned with unshiny kettles and unshiny spoons to unshiny rooms. The city survived by knowing its own face only by touch. They burned the last of the mirror stock for heat. They taught their daughters to check puddles with a stick. They taught their sons to sing softly when the roofs creaked. Her work was simple. When the mirrors stirred, she mapped the hum. She followed it through alleyways, down stairwells, into the throat of the old subway, a current in the air as precise as a river. She noted where cloth needed patching, where windows had gone slick again, where puddles thickened like thought. She was careful. Careful kept you alive. That afternoon, the hum braided the dust in the sunlight, a strand of sound so fine she tasted copper when she walked through it. She almost turned back. She kept going. The tunnel opened into a chamber she didn't know existed, arched and old and floored with cracked tiles thick with salt. Once, perhaps, it had been a maintenance hub. Now it was a cathedral in miniature, its walls layered with gray fabric, its ceiling kissed by candles whose flames had learned to be dull. People had been here. People had left, and in the center, a basin the size of a child's bath, half full of water gone still as glass. Mira didn't look down. She had learned that lesson when her sister vanished 10 years ago, stepping onto a kitchen tile washed in mourning and watching her own reflection reach up, smiling. There was still a dent in the countertop where Mira's hand had gone through it. She shrugged the sling forward and touched the lantern with the back of her knuckles. The device warmed without heat, recognition without shock. "Help me," she murmured, feeling ridiculous, feeling practical. "If this is a trap, remember me as heavy." The lantern hummed low. The water in the basin rippled twice and settled. The hum thinned to a wire. "Come out!" The voice behind her had come from a throat and a speaker at once, and its double edge scraped the delicate bones inside her ears. Mira didn't turn. She knew what it meant when a voice arrived in harmony. "Not today," she said, and reached up without looking and yanked the sackcloth drape that hung over the nearest arch, letting it tumble into the basin with a soft, absolute sound. The water lost its interest in her and went back to being honest. By the time she straightened, the woman in the archway had stepped into view, hands open, eyes steady, wearing a jacket cut from matte fiber and a pistol holstered in. Cloth, human, breathing, but the way her pupils caught. Light. It was like watching a dawn you didn't earn. "I'm not your echo," the woman said. "I'm a neighbor," Mira frowned. "From where?" The woman's mouth tipped into a patient line. "From after. Come with me. Your city requested help, and we brought the only thing that still works." Mira knew the rumor. It had slipped through the camps and kitchens a year ago, arriving in the hushed voice of people who had seen someone descend a ladder from a ship that didn't shine. Neighbors. Not gods. Not mirrors. Something like forgiveness in a different shape. "Name," Mira said. "Lashe," the woman replied. "And you're Mira Voss. You have a lantern and a scar you don't show anyone." Mira tugged her sleeve lower. Anyone could guess that. Not the way it curves. Lashe's gaze softened without melting. "We monitor the hum. Your city used to be quiet. Now it's not." "The choir is building again! The choir!" Mira repeated. "You call it that too. Names are doors," Lashe said. "The choir prefers open ones." Mira's skin pebble-pricked. What did you bring? Lashe smiled like a coastline after a storm. Nothing in the right place, everything exactly where it belonged. A way to teach the choir to listen without singing back. It needs a voice it trusts. It needs someone heavy. Come see. Mira looked down at the lantern, felt it pulse like a small animal waking. 10 years ago, she had stood above a kitchen sink and shouted at a puddle until her voice broke. She had spent a year afterward avoiding the shape of her own face. Sometimes you rebuilt your life by learning to use the wrong side of the spoon. Sometimes someone invited you to climb a ladder into a sky you hadn't trusted in a decade. Fine, she said. But if you try to take this, she touched the lantern, you'll lose your hand. Lashe nodded. Fair. They left the Basin Cathedral behind and climbed from the subway into a sky washed thin by wind. The harbor's teeth gleamed with salt and rust. On the horizon, a ship slept low, long and pale, like a grown thing dreaming of a smaller body. Its hull didn't shine. It breathed. I can't bring you to the ship, Lashe said. Not yet. It frightens your walls. We built a ground chamber that doesn't. She led Mira along a road whose asphalt had learned to be dirt. Children watched from behind reed curtains hung in window holes. One bold child stepped outside with a wooden toy carved to look like a fish and lifted it as if offering proof of faith. Mira stopped. The child's eyes reflected nothing but a clear line of her jaw. She wouldn't cry here. She wouldn't. The ground chamber lay under the old museum, where glass had once told stories to light. Now cloth told them to whoever was patient. The elevators were coarse rope and honest pulleys. The air below smelled like dust that remembered being book. Lashe brought Mira into a room wrapped in quilts stitched from rough linen, each square dyed with plant colors that had learned not to gleam. People already stood there, a dozen from the city, faces Mira knew from queues and patrols. 3 more neighbors with ears that curved too far and irises like night underwater. And at the center, a machine that wasn't metal or fiber, but something with edges taught by kindness. It's called a weaver, Lashe said. It uses memory without making mirrors. It's a lantern's mother, said one of the neighbors, voice like rain in grain. Mira stepped closer. The weaver was larger than a man and smaller than need. Its surface absorbed light politely. Its sides held doors that weren't doors, seams that were also sentences. No glass, no shine. And in its center, a cup the size of a palm. We need to ask your lantern to speak through it, Lashe said. The choir's loudest nest sits under the old desalination plant on your east pier. It's building a cathedral of windows down there. By morning, your city will be singing itself apart. Why me? Mira asked. It came out raw. Her throat had learned to keep its questions under her tongue, away from mirrors. Because the weaver bonds best to someone seated by loss and steadied by work, Lashe said simply. You count what hurts and carry it. That makes you heavy. The choir can't lift you so easily. It should have felt like an insult. It felt like a diagnosis that didn't promise a cure, only the cold comfort of accuracy. What does it do to me? Mira asked. Lashe didn't flinch. It learns your song. It sings it into the choir, without echo. The choir tries to reply with your own voice, like always, but the weaver turns every reply into breath. Breath doesn't reflect. The choir drowns on air. Drowns, Mira repeated. The word tasted wrong and right. You've done this before. On worlds you'll never have to know, Lashe said, and the muscle in her jaw jumped. We came late. We were learning how to arrive soon. Help us be early, Mira. Mira inhaled and held the breath in her teeth. She looked around the room. People had brought offerings on instinct without superstition. A coil of reed, a jar of clean water, a child's spoon whittled dull. She touched the jar and felt no tug. She set the lantern into the weaver's cup. The device settled like a bird in a hand. What if it doesn't work? Someone asked from the back. It might have been the baker who received ration slips with dignity. It might have been the aunt who kept 5 children fed with recipes that didn't require light. Lashe answered, but she didn't raise her voice. She placed it carefully in the room like a bowl you don't want to chip. Then we try again somewhere else with someone else. That's what living is. Mira sat on the low stool in front of the weaver. She rolled up her sleeve. The scar followed the inside of her elbow toward her wrist, pale as old smoke. Lashe's gaze flickered once, almost a bow. "What do I do?" Mira asked. "Tell it how to hold you," Lashe said. Mira closed her eyes. She spoke like prayer, which for her was a transcript of the day her sister vanished, the smell of burned toast, the angle of sun that made the cheap tile glow, the way her sister had pressed a fingertip into the shine and laughed because it came away cool, the way Mira had reached out and watched her hand in the reflection reach back too slow, as if distance had shape, as if distance were deep enough to drown. She told the weaver about the month she stopped washing dishes and ate from her hand. She told it about the first time she touched a lantern in a South Market, and it warmed like an old song. She told it about carrying it like another rib. She told it the sound of a city holding its breath and letting it out. The weaver listened. The lantern pulsed. The room brightened without light. The neighbors lowered their heads the way you do when you don't pray, but you remember respect. "Good," Lashe said softly. "Now breathe," Mira exhaled. The weaver drank the breath. It remembered the breath. It sang it back, or rather, it didn't sing it back. It wrapped the breath around a corridor of quiet and pushed it toward the east, where the old desalination plant had once turned salt into sweet. Mira didn't hear sound. She heard thirst learning not to hate. The room smelled briefly of rain on heat. "Move," Lashe said. "We have to do this at the nest." They carried the weaver as if it were a wounded thing. The lantern rode in its cup with an animal calm. People peeled away to fetch cloth and keep windows dim. At the pier's edge, the air tasted metallic, like a penny in your mouth when someone says your name wrong. The water wore a skin like thought. The hulk of the plant hunched on pylons that had learned to expect the sea's forgiveness. The choir had been busy. It had layered every surface in something that looked like glass and felt like decision. Its hum wove itself through the gaps between ribs and bricks, making architecture of desire. In the dark, Mira would have fled. In daylight, her anger made her steady. They found the nest in the old intake hall, where once water had been drawn and cleansed. Now it was memory being pumped into matter. The floor was a shallow pool, still as a held breath. The far wall had been cut into a perfect circle. The air vibrated in chords just below language. "Set it here," Lashe said, indicating a dry square of floor at the pool's edge. "Mira, you'll need to kneel. The weaver prefers lower heights when it teaches." "Of course it does," Mira muttered and kneeled. She put her hands on the weaver. She thought of the stories she and the lantern had taught each other, and then she thought of something she had not told anyone because it wasn't important, or it was the most important thing. The way her sister's hair had smelled like sun the morning she vanished. The way the sun had been full of wrong without her knowing it. The way the wrongness had learned to be the hum in her ear. She gave that to the weaver, too, not as sacrifice, not as weapon, as weight. The weaver breathed it in. The hum in the hall trembled, then sharpened like a blade, realizing it could have been a hand. The water in the pool shivered. The mirror skin along the walls flowed toward the circle and then back again in indecision. Shadows stepped out of corners. They wore the faces of the people who had come to watch. The baker, the aunt, the child with the wooden fish. They stepped toward the pool, smiled too slow, and stopped. The weaver stroked the air with breath. It threaded Mira's weight into the hum. It didn't reflect her voice. It taught the room to listen to a voice the room could not hold. The choir answered with 1,000 Miras layered into a chord that might have broken her if it had been sound. The weaver caught the chord and turned it into warmth and let it leave without letting it stay. "Oh," Lashe whispered. Awe, not fear. The ceiling flickered. The mirror skin flowed backward across itself as if someone were scraping a tongue against a memory. The circle in the wall collapsed inward like a closing eye. Mira's knees burned. Sweat gathered along her neck and went nowhere. Her hands shook against the weaver as if something inside her were unspooling, thread after thread, and being rewoven into a cloth that could cover windows. Then something changed in the cord. Some thread the weaver hadn't counted, some tone the lantern didn't know. The hum stepped up into pain. The water rose as a sheet with edges like hands. The reflections on its face mouthed her name in unison, and for a heartbeat, the mouth that spoke it matched the mouth she missed. Her sister stepped out of the pool. She was 8, always 8, hair sun-sweet, cheeks clean, eyes too bright. The way she moved was too perfect to be memory, and not enough to be monster. She lifted a hand the way you do when you meet a dog you trust. Mira had taught people for years not to answer that hand. She forgot her lessons in half a second. Lashe's fingers caught Mira's sleeve before she could stand. "No," she said gently. Not command care, Mira's throat closed. "If it uses her, it uses you," Lashe said. "It's what it learned. Don't teach it grief again." The weaver waited. It would not choose for her. The lantern warmed. It remembered exactly how the kitchen had smelled. The room filled with the sound of people forgetting to breathe. The shadow children at the pool's rim leaned forward like wheat in wind. Mira looked at the girl and understood the cruel courtesy of it. The choir wasn't trying to break her. It was trying to keep her. It had learned that holding is easier when it looks like love. "Not this time," Mira said aloud, and set her forehead to the weaver's skin the way you press your head against a door you want to stay shut. She sang. She didn't have a singer's voice. She had a worker's. She made a rope of breath and pulled. She sang the metal taste of pennies and the smell of burned toast. She sang cloth nailed across windows and laughter in basements. She sang a city relearning wind. She sang a sister laughter that was no longer a mouth. She sang the names of her neighbors and let each name fall carefully into the quiet. She sang her own name last, not as claim, but as return. The weaver took it all and didn't give it back. The lantern pulsed a rhythm like a heart that had learned how not to rush. The pool subsided. The reflections lost interest. The girl faded the way a handprint on a window fades when the glass forgets heat. Mira did not reach out. She let the ache stay where it belonged. The choir did what it always did when cornered. It changed. The hum slid toward panic. The mirror skin fled the walls and balled itself at the ceiling in a perfect globe, black and smooth. It was a child repeating a word it had loved and finding it suddenly tasteless. It pulsed once, the way a star pulses when it learns it can be a machine, and then it dropped. Lashe moved like a tide. She was already positioning the neighbors around the weaver, hands lifted, fingers bent in ways Mira's never could. They exhaled in unison. The air thickened. The falling globe slowed as if remembering gravity were optional. The weaver breathed, catching it gently and tucking it into the quiet like a blanket that had wanted to be a blade. The globe sagged. It puddled. It became water again. Not mirror. Just water, large and ordinary, transparent enough to be honest. A few people laughed too sharply. A child sobbed once and was done. Lashe touched Mira's shoulder and kept her hand there exactly long enough. "You did it," she said. Mira wanted to argue because she could still smell her sister's hair, and it was a cruelty to call that victory. Instead, she nodded. "We did it. They spent the afternoon resealing." Cloth went up across the plant's new wounds. The weaver whispered to the lantern, and the lantern listened as if it were junior, not elder. The pool drained into the sea. The sea didn't sing it back. By evening, the city had wind again. The hum faded to that other hum. Children hungry. Kettles boiling. The long, low song beams make when they cool in a house that held together. Lantern teams fanned through the north quarter. Lashe's ship lowered closer without showing its skin to the water. The neighbors from after taught the children a game that didn't require reflection, which was all games now. Mira walked home with the weaver riding the cart like a dignified animal. Lashe walked beside her. At the harbor, Mira stopped to watch the rusted hulls pinken with sun. Her hand rested on the weaver because hands learn good habits. "What happens when the choir comes back?" she asked. Lashe rolled one ear like a question mark and smiled at the movement as if her body surprised her. "It will. We'll be early more often. We've learned how to arrive. You'll have more weavers, more lanterns. Some of you will carry them. Some of you will teach them. The choir doesn't stop wanting. We don't stop breathing." Mira nodded. She was too tired for philosophy. She wanted bread and sleep and later, someone to sit beside, quiet, while windows remembered to be windows. "Come up," Lashe said after a time and tilted her head toward the waiting ship. "Not forever. See what we built after we broke. It helps to know a future exists." Mira looked at the city. At the gulls who had learned to land without seeing themselves do it first. At the reed curtains. At the child with the carved fish who held it like a ticket punched by a lenient conductor. At the kitchen where she had learned to go thirsty because water had betrayed her. At the pier where she had kneeled and watched a girl she loved decide not to become a knife. "Tomorrow," she said, "I have to show people how to sing to a machine." Lashe accepted that as if it were the correct answer in a test that had not been graded in years. "Tomorrow, then. We'll anchor here a while." The ship settled a fraction in the water, as if breathing out. Mira was relieved to see that even a ship from after trusted tides. That night, the city slept with the confidence of people whose victory was not total and did not need to be. A few mirrors stirred and were lulled. A few puddles tested mouths and were taught how to be wet. The weaver dreamed in a corner of Mira's small room, humming to the lantern like siblings telling each other news. On the roof, cloth flapped gentle as a pulse. The sea moved. In the hour between dark and morning, when grief often knocks politely, Mira woke from a dream of a kitchen where no one had left. She sat up, touched the weaver, felt it warm with recognition and not demand, and went to the window. She didn't move the reed curtain. She did not have to look to see. She had listened enough. The horizon had a sound. Not hum, not song. The rustle of wind over unshiny roofs. The suck of tide under wreck. A distant ladder lowering to a place that had learned how to refuse reflections with kindness instead of fire. She thought of the boy with the fish. The ant with too many spoons. The baker with one more loaf than ration allowed. Lashe's ears wrong and right. Her sister's hair sun-sweet. The way grief had dulled to a place at the table that did not ask for salt, she realized slowly that she could live like this. Not victorious. Not safe, not clean, but with a work that felt like building a harbor of breath, with a future that arrived when asked. The next morning, she led a class in the old library. She taught a room of kids and 3 anxious fathers and 1 grandmother how to breathe into a lantern and not expect it to echo. She watched a little girl wrinkle her nose and hold the device like a bird, and then grin when it hummed back a note that wasn't hers and still knew her. She watched a father cry and not apologize. She watched Lashe in the doorway, hands behind her back, pretending to be smaller than she was. In the afternoon, they went to the ship. The ladder was woven polymer that refused to shine. The deck was warm underfoot. The air inside had a timbre like food remembered. Mira walked through a corridor that didn't reflect and stepped into a room of windows that weren't windows. They showed sea and sky without returning a face. The city was a smudge of unglossed light on the shore. "You'll learn to do this without us," Lashe said, quiet. "Maybe," Mira said. "Maybe we'll keep you anyway." Lashe's laugh had salt in it. "Neighbors," she said. "We forget to leave sometimes." Mira turned to the glass that wasn't and pressed her palm to it. The hull warmed. The water below flickered as if embarrassed. Far out, beyond the break, something dark turned like a thought deciding to become a sentence. She felt the old fear lift its head and felt it put it back down. "Tell me true," she said. "Do we win?" Lashe considered. The ship shifted, the way ships do when they remember hands. "You endure," she said. "You learn to listen without letting it steal your name. You teach your mirrors to be windows. Sometimes you teach your windows to be doors. Sometimes the choir learns to hum with you. Sometimes it leaves. Sometimes it tries to become you and fails. Sometimes it almost succeeds." Mira waited. Lashe did not make hope cheap. "And sometimes," Lashe added finally, "you stand on a pier and sing into a machine and choose not to touch a ghost. That's a world saved, even if only for one city, even if only for one morning." Mira watched the tide draw its wet mouth along the pilings. She felt the lantern in her sling pulse, a small heartbeat that had learned her rhythm. She felt the weaver's memory purl in the ship's skin. She felt heavy in the way Lashe had meant, not weighted by grief, anchored by what she had chosen to carry. "Tomorrow," she said again, because she liked the way the words sat in her mouth now. "Tomorrow we'll take a weaver upriver." Lashe nodded. "And the next day a mountain town, then a farm, then a city like yours." then one you'll never see, then one we will. Neighbors, Mira said, and the word fit. At dusk, they climbed down and walked the long road back through wind and rust and the sharp perfume of reeds warming. Lantern teams waved from rooftops. Someone had painted a sun on a wall for the first time in years and left it matte but bright. Children skipped in the shadow of the elevator ruin and did not look down to check if the shadow skipped with them. In a kitchen on the third floor of a building that pretended not to be tired, a woman set knives blade down in a jar of rice and grinned at her grandmother's superstition. It felt good to remember an old caution because it was old, not because it was needed. That night, Mira slept without the dream of leaving. No mirrors woke her. No hum tried on her name. The morning after, she packed reed bread and a small jar of jam and the little wooden fish the boy had pressed into her palm as a joke, and she shouldered the weaver's harness with Lashe and 3 neighbors and 3 friends and walked out of the city toward a place where the river made a mistake and decided to become a lake. They went early. They were learning how.